Welcome to Benenaras, where we discuss all things Latin and writing and books.
I'm Rachel Cunning, and I live on a mountain with lots of granite rocks and ponderosa pines and more pine cones than you could ever possibly imagine. I wish I weren't lying. And abundant wildflowers like chiming bells and penstemon and...
I am Arianne Carroll, and I am a concrete noun, and I don't live on a mountain. But I have lots of other concrete nouns in my house. I have 10 loaves of freshly baked challah. I have a wiggly spotted dog who has been barking at the road all afternoon. I have no cabinets in my kitchen. And
so that's like a lack of concrete nouns.
Yes, I have concreteless nouns. And I have sunflowers sitting on the buffet across from me. And I want you to listen to all the things that we just said. And what we've just done is not just told you where we are, but we've drawn you a picture so that you can imagine you're here with us. And we've done that using really, really specific nouns. Rachel, why did we do that?
Probably so that you could stalk us and find out exactly where we live.
Or possibly because...
Oh, wait, no. Yeah, don't do that. That would be really weird and would require police and yeah. Yeah, but no, we did it so that you can really visualize like the places around us. You've created a mental image of where we are, not a real image, but a mental image of where we are and the places around us.
Those images help us create feeling. They help us create association. They help us become involved in something. If you know, for example, that there are plants on the side of my house, you might think, why has she not mowed? If I tell you I have 7 blackberry bushes at the side of my house, you show up at my front door with a bucket. Rachel,
right? Or not even the front door; it's the side of the house.
So just go there with a bucket.
So you just go pick the blackberries.
I do actually have blackberry plants. Concrete nouns are fantastic, the way that action verbs are. Rachel, why?
Why? The concrete nouns are easier for students to acquire in a second language because students can connect the word to something that they interact with in their daily life.
And anybody who's watching has probably experienced this with their students anyway. You know, they're going to realize that pencil is much easier than hope. Abstract nouns are a lot harder for students to link to images, and the more you have a specific image or a specific idea, the easier it is to remember them and the easier it is to draw a picture. Some of them are easier than others. And I want to clarify that concrete nouns has 2 functions here, the phrase concrete nouns. It doesn't just mean don't say hope. You can say hope. I just wrote a thing that was super philosophical. There's nothing wrong with talking about abstract ideas. Concrete nouns also means identifying what the thing is instead of just saying the thing. Concrete nouns flesh out a picture for us. I wrote a scene I shared with you guys recently in which the main character is in a sketchy cowpona in the middle of the night, and a cowboy sneaks in and he's clearly going to do nefarious things. And mom shows up behind him with a candelabrum in her hand, and you know what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen. It's what always happens to Colonel Mustard with the candelabrum in the billiards room. Whereas if she shows up with like a raise or an instrumentum, it suddenly either gets a lot more or a lot less threatening, since a raise could be a sock or a samurai sword. It's probably not a samurai sword. Could be a samurai sword.
It's probably not a samurai sword.
Let's
be realistic. Now, there are times for mystery, and that's okay. You want to end a chapter with, suddenly you see your mom. Something is glinting in her hand.
Dun.
Fade to black. You can totally do that. Like that can build suspense. But eventually, if you continue with like the thing, people are gonna lose interest. If mom raises the candelabrum, on the other hand, I can see that. I can see the light on it. I can see the shape of it. I know what that looks like, and I have a pretty good idea about what's going to happen. I don't need to know what happens if she brings down a thing.
And you don't care.
I'm not compelled.
Right.
Yeah.
And in the same way, I know what a toga looks like. I know what it moves like when somebody walks. I have a mental image for that. A vestimentum is harder. Is that a stola? Is it chaps? Is it a top hat? I do not know. And if you can name the thing, it'll help your imagination.
Yes. And that might spur your writing to have more illustrative scenes because you can see it too, and you yourself can imagine it. And your character is walking down the street, and it's really different. You have a very different character if your character's wearing a cowboy hat versus that top hat.
Right,
Way
exactly.
different characters.
We touched back on the scene that I had shared earlier. Do you have one that you want to discuss where you felt like a concrete noun was particularly important to the story or the imagery or comprehension?
Yeah. So one of the ways that Psyche or Psuke gets to know Cupid is through her discovering of his kingdom. And she learns a lot about him before she even gets there. I wanted his kingdom and his house to be overwhelmingly magical and opulent with still, although it's an advanced novella, pretty limited vocab. She needs her socks knocked off. She's afraid she's gonna marry a snake or
Literally a snake.
she needs literally, unfortunately. So she needs to feel comforted and intrigued and not frightened. So I used a couple cognates like gemos and statuos because they do suggest wealth and opulence. And then the house itself is literally gleaming and shining, which again comes back to those action verbs like gleaming. It literally shines without the help of the sun. And all of those things suggest a lot about Cupid's wealth and power without ever saying the word rich.
Which is a really beautiful effect of concrete nouns. They go a long way towards showing and not telling because they allow readers to infer information without having to be told that, which forces you to use your imagination, which forces you to put yourself in that place, which is fabulous. They do a lot of heavy lifting for you.
Of course, I just threw a bunch of words out to suggest power and wealth and opulence, but I was writing Cupid and Psyche at a much higher level, so I did have more vocabulary available to me.
And there's a degree to which you can assume cognates a little more strongly at a higher level because the kids have had more access to vocabulary and aren't going to look at statua and assume any one of the creative things that kids will assume that it is because it also starts with an S. And concrete nouns, you mentioned that this is at an upper level, and that's true, but concrete nouns are just as applicable in the lower levels. Lucia puts frogs in her brother's bag, not an animal, frog. I had a lot of use for the word frog. I could use it over and over and over again. So I wasn't just throwing a concrete noun in there that was never going to come up again. But also, they're little. People find them gross. Some people find them gross. It is going to immediately evoke a reaction, both in kids who get the brothers, frogs are gross perspective, and Lucia's frogs are awesome perspective.
We teach, just want to interject for a second, we teach Lucia Puella Mala in our intro class, and I have had kids say, I will never forget the word frog.
They don't.
And they kind of they're like frog. They know frog backwards and forwards and yes.
Right, well, and so the frogs, and the frogs make a noise, and they know what noise the frog makes, and every time we sing Old MacDonald, the kids want to say bracka-cacox-co ox, which, in case you're interested, does not fit metrically into that song. So it cements itself into the kids' memories. It also helps develop both kids, not your kids and my kids, but the two kids in the book, Lucia and Sextus. It helps develop their characters because we know how Sextus feels about it and his reaction tells us something. We know how Lucia feels about it and her reaction tells us something. And our students relate to that. And you just did this with Bellerophon. You used Frenu to talk about controlling Pegasus. And that's a super concrete noun. And you could have totally just used instrumental. You didn't.
Or just not used it.
But
instead, Franum became, although it's a low frequency word, it became this really emotional and visual symbol about power and control and relationships. Um, and I used to ride horses, so I know how that thing goes around a horse's head. So like I'm envisioning poor Pegasus with this bit in his mouth, and how uncomfortable and weird that must be if you've never worn one. So that's a personal thing that I have because I've ridden horses, but at the same time, regardless, low frequency word, but it has such power in that novella as a concrete noun and as a symbol.
Yeah, and at the same time, I mean, we're writing in a second language, right? So sometimes we have to sacrifice specificity. Yeah, I mean, it might be your native language, but Rachel, I just printed the full draft of the Choose Your Own Adventure novel that we finished last night. I have the egg draft. One day I will explain to you why it's called an egg draft, but I have the egg draft in my hands. And it contains, I don't actually, I have it on the countertop over there. But it contains a scene where the kid finds a vehiculum. It's a chariot. It's not important. Like, it really doesn't mean anything to the scene. It's not a huge deal if it's a litter versus a chariot versus, I don't know, 7 squids in a boat. Right. Like, it just doesn't make any difference. So we vehiculum. Sometimes you do. And sometimes you have a Westmentone because it just doesn't make a difference. You don't need to add to the vocab burden that isn't going to come up again, that the kids don't care about, and that doesn't add something measurable to your scene. That violates our rules about low vocab frequency about low frequency vocab. So you really do have to weigh whether it's important. So to return to the general idea of specificity and what that does for your scene, we're gonna do an episode shortly, a sort of before and after, to show you what it looks like when you put some meat on the bones of a scene, some action verbs and some concrete nouns and some sort of emotional oomph in there. But it's not our next episode. Rachel, what's our next episode?
Our next episode, we're gonna do a writer's workshop with your husband.
I don't know.
Who is working on his own. What?
I don't know that guy.
You do. And we're going to do a writer's workshop with him to kind of work through a scene of his rough draft. I was there. Like, I was at the wedding.
That's true, you were there.
It was great. Okay, regroup. So we're going to do a workshop with him, and we're going to work through some scenes that he has in his own novella that he's working on, and we're going to offer some advice and suggestions for how you might revise, because you might want to write a novella, but revision is a huge, huge part, and getting ideas of how you might be able to approach a scene is pretty important.
Scrivite or reescrivite, vamos avibus.
Fagite
valeatus.